Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today at VirtuousCon for a conversation on Black identity and authenticity in the age of new media, which is going to be a panel discussion on and around identity and self-identification in the evolved state of the internet, also known as the metaverse, as well as how we hold on to the Black diaspora culture and ethnicity in a space where this definition could be spoofed or appropriated. My name is Cheyenne Davis, they, them pronouns, and I'm a writer, content creator, and media adjunct professor at NYU. Today, I'm joined by four wonderful guests. The first one is Fred Joseph, he, him, his, who is a two-time New York Times bestselling author of The Black Friend and Patriarchy Blues, and author of Better Than We Found It and Black Panther Wakanda Forever, The Courage to Dream. He was recognized for the International Literacy Association's 2021 Children's and Young Adults Book Award, and he's also a 2019 Forbes 30 Under 30 list maker for marketing and advertising, an activist and philanthropist with over 10 years of marketing experience. He was also honored with the 2018 Comic-Con Humanitarian of the Year Award and is a member of 2018 the Root 100's list of most influential African-American people. Thank you, Fred Joseph, for joining us today. We also have Lauren Ruffin, she, her, who is a thinker, a designer, and leader interested in building strong, sustainable anti-racist systems and organizations, who also likes to explore how we can leverage new technologies to combat racial and economic injustice. Lauren is an associate professor of world building and visualizing futures at Arizona State University and is a co-founder of Crux, an immersive storytelling cooperative that collaborates with Black artists as they create content in virtual reality and augmented reality, also known as XR. In 2017, she started Artist Campaign School, a new educational program that has trained 74 artists to run for political office to date. Lauren has served on the governing boards of Black Innovations Alliance, Black Girls Code, and Main Street Phoenix Cooperative, and on the advisory boards of Art Up and Black Girl Ventures. Please welcome Lauren Ruffin, and thank you for joining us today. Up next is Dr. Courtney D. Cogburn, she, they pronouns, who is an associate professor at the Columbia University School of Social Work and faculty of the Columbia Population Research Center and Data Science Institute, where she co-chairs the computational science, social science working group. Sorry, I'm a little tongue-tied, y'all, so just bear with me. You know, we on a different platform, so I'm sorry. She employs a transdisciplinary approach to improve the characterization and measurement of racism and in examining the role of racism in the production of racial inequities in health. She also works at the intersection of emerging technology, social justice, and Black futures. She's a leader of a 1,000-cut journey, an immersive virtual reality experience of racism that premiered at the 2018 Tribeca Film Festival, the co-founder of the Justice, Equity, and Technology Studio at Columbia, and also serves as the Chief Equity Officer and Knowledge Transfer Director of the Learning the Earth with Artificial Intelligence and Physics, LEAP, as an NSF Science and Technology Center, at NSF Science and Technology Center, STC. Thank you so much, Dr. Cogburn, for joining us. Please welcome them as they join us on stage. And then the last person is Dr. Jonathan P. Higgins, they, them tired, also known as Dr. John Paul, who is an award-winning educator, professor, national speaker, freelance journalist, thought leader, and media critic who examines the intersections of identity, gender, and race in entertainment, named National Black Justice Coalition's inaugural Emerging Leaders to watch in Business Equities magazine's Top 40 LGBTQ people under 40. Their work has been featured on sites like Essence, Ebony, Complex, MTV News, Out Magazine, BET, and Paper Mag. Dr. Higgins is the creator, executive producer, and host of the Black Fat Femme podcast, named one of the top Black podcasts to listen to by Essence Magazine, and regularly writes and lectures on what liberation means for fat, queer, flat, Black, non-binary people. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Higgins. Please welcome them as they join us on stage.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
All right, I'm happy to see all these beautiful Black people, and we're going to jump into this conversation. So as I stated previously, this is going to be a conversation on the intersections of the internet and what Black identity stands for, what it means, and how those things intertwine. So let's just start with the basics. The first question is, what does Black identity mean to y'all? And feel free to start wherever y'all like to start.
I guess I could jump in. For me, Black identity means imagination, futurism, right? I think that Black people historically everywhere around the world have always had to have, once again, both imagination and a futurist lens, not only for survival, but imagining what it looks like to thrive and thrive as one's total self.
Thank you, Fred, for that. Dr. Cogburn?
Yeah, and I'll add, from an academic perspective, when we study Black identity, we think of it as being multidimensional. So we think about not only how we think about and feel about ourselves, but also an understanding of how we're viewed in the public. And that combination is actually quite important to our survival. But increasingly, I'm imagining Black identity as being untethered from whiteness. So not a reflection of, not in spite of, not in reaction to whiteness in any way, and the circumstances that help promote and create that for us.
Thank you. I'm so happy that you said that, because I've been in a lot of talks, and the thing I keep thinking about is the most recent video that we saw from Kimberly Crenshaw, right? This notion of what intersectionality is, this idea of being able to say, I am this, I am that, but I am also this thing, I am also. And so for me, my biggest thing is, I've been really trying to reclaim this in all of the work that I'm doing. For me to be Black means to be free, meaning I'm just a free ass Black, queer, fat, non-binary, loudmouth, whatever you want to call me, I am that girl, right? That's really what I am, is I am all of the things that you say I am and more. That's what Blackness is for me.
Yeah, and I appreciate this question. I'll just add that I think there's an element of shape-shifting for all of us. And I reflect on this a lot. I just hit my 5th year in the Southwest, having moved from the East Coast. So I'm in Phoenix now. And I think about border spaces, how regardless of where Black people are, we're sort of existing on a border of something, and often we're straddling multiple borders. And in particular, we see this once we get outside of the coast and outside of larger cities. And so that sort of, beautiful talent of shape-shifting, I think, is so sexy. And I think we do it so, so well.
Thank you all for those beautiful reflections. I totally agree. Being a Black person is being multiplicited. It's also just being, just being who you want to be, and being, not confined to a certain space, and being allowed to have that evolution, and to have the ability to live freely and speak freely within those intersections that you operate in without, unabashedly. We know that Black identity means so much in so many different things for different people. We also know that the internet has played a huge role in how Black folks self-identify and how Black folks are able to articulate their identifications. So that being said, how have the internet, social media, and media played a crucial part in how Black people identify with themselves and each other?
I think, the internet has played a critical role in connecting us more deeply to the diaspora, right? And I think through that connection, we're connected to a wholeness of Blackness, a range of Blackness that may not be present in our immediate spaces and day-to-day lives, especially depending on where you live. And so I think that has forced us to claim Blackness in a more whole and complete way, in the ways that you were talking about, Dr. Higgins, about I'm all these things. I am a whole, complete, complicated person. And I think that connection to the diaspora has helped us to do that and create visibility and space for ourselves.
If I could jump in and add, I think the other thing that I think is so important is when we look at the internet and social media, and I'll have to say this, I'm kind of sort of fangirling because I'm such a fan of Fred. There's this notion of community, right? You're not in it by yourself. What I have learned is that the internet, Black people are funny. That's the thing I will say, is that Black people, we are, when it comes to jokes, when it comes to every big moment, whether it be bad or good, Black people are going to take it and spin it and run with it. And quickly, real quick.
Already.
Right. But also too, I'll say, and I'm thankful for this. Folks like Fred, folks like Karkisha, folks, you know, a lot of who I am as a creator came from Twitter, came from, you know, Twitter Spaces, came from all of these opportunities. And so we're also a community of people who are creating opportunities for other people and linking and being able to find space. And I think, like, even with VirtuousCon, right, I wouldn't be connected to VirtuousCon if it wasn't for the Black community that I have over at Twitter and other social media platforms. So really, when I say that, beyond the comedy, we really are the network. We are really truly the network.
Yeah, if I was to jump in, well, first of all, we're all mutual fans, and I mean, I've said many times how much of a fan of your work, Dr. Higgins, and just so many people on here. But you know, what I was going to add, you know, as a cishet Black man, I think that I have to add is forced me to be critical. Right. I think that the opportunity that social media has given us when in terms of Black identities is, you know, I'm from New York, and I've always existed in spaces with people who are queer. But have I ever had to exist in spaces with people who are unabashedly themselves, right? Have I ever had to exist in spaces where maybe the Black man, the Black cishet man, doesn't get to be the loudest or most profound in a room? And so I've had to, and I think it's forced a lot of us to have to sit back and learn, right? And really see, like, how do we fit in, not to just take up space, but to, quite frankly, make space. And I think that's something beautiful about social media and Black identity.
Yeah, you know, and since I'm someone who thinks so much about money, you know, I have to just throw in here that, like, our ability to transparently see each other as generators of wealth for our families and our communities, like that key component. You know, the research sort of talks about how we use the internet in a completely different way than white people use the internet. We use it to not only connect with each other and tell jokes, but also to make money, collaborate, create studio models, and sort of uplift each other in a way that has a sort of informal circular economy that we engage with. And I don't want to let that go because, you know, our people talk about our buying power with, like, Popeyes and, like, the value of Black culture, right? Like, you know, all of our jokes actually add benefit to corporate interests, and we add benefit to our own interests too. So I want to make sure that we just sort of collect that in this conversation.
May I add something to that before we move? I apologize if I'm not allowed to. I think to that point, I think that's a phenomenal point. In that way, I think that social media and the digital age has kind of added an archive that we can all see in real time of the way Blackness is informing literally everything, right? So you mentioned finances and you mentioned the Popeye sandwich and things like that, but I can look back and see that every single trend around the entire world over the last 20 years has in some way, shape, and form been informed or, quite frankly, created by Black people. And I don't know that we had that without being gaslit about it long before.
Yeah, and I'll just say blackplanet.com because that started everything. I'm
Right.
old enough to remember it.
Verve truth.
Hashtag memory unlocked, because Black Planet was that platform. Listen.
Baby, the way Black Planet, I was finding other queer people on Black Planet. Yes, God.
Listen, we were all out there fine. I grew up in a little teeny tiny town. I was finding Black people.
That's what I'm saying, right? You're just expanding your community and exposure. Yeah.
The one thing that I can definitely add is that the internet has really democratized, and I will use that lowercase d, democratized the ways in which we connect, because it's accessible, number one. Number two, it also has given people the space to not only build community, but to also challenge the communities around them when there is a lack of us, when there is a lack of intersectionality, when there is a need for expansion and growth, and having conversations that we normally would not be able to be empowered to have in person, because we know some of the shit that we talk about, is very difficult, especially as Black people, but these are conversations that are necessary and needed. Yes, the internet can be a space that has been helpful for us in connecting and expressing ourselves, and even generating socioeconomic wealth and things like that. However, there are also some challenges that we have to face too, in the face of the internet, in the face of things expanding in terms of globalization and things like that. So my question is, in the wake of, like, censorship and community guidelines that absolutely make no sense, do these platforms give us enough tools to self-identify and represent ourselves? So some examples would be, do they give enough gender and ethnic identifiers? Are there enough community tags for us to be able to connect and find each other? So on and so forth.
Well, I see Fred shaking their head no, and I'm going to say no. It's very, sometimes I find that a lot of the stuff is very linear. And it oftentimes too, I'm just going to say it, a lot of it is also very white, right? So a lot of folks can't seem to understand that there are identities that are that exist, or beings outside of the white gaze. And someone mentioned that in the comments, so I want to name that is something that I think about often, right? How can I exist out of the gaze, specifically out of the white queer gaze? Because I know for myself, being non-binary, being very vocal about being non-binary, right? Oftentimes we talk about it from just the white lens. And so all of that to say, and really talking about this notion of self-identifying and representing themselves, I think the other part too is watching brands, and I'm seeing this not just even with like Fred's book, or thinking about other individuals who are putting books out there, right? The book bans and all of these different things, the ways that TikTok and LinkedIn and Twitter will come after you for speaking truth to power, right? I know a lot of my friends who have had their have had their platforms blocked or have their platforms erased because they were naming the ways that systematic oppression was impacting them both online and off. And so I think about that often, right? And then even me too, right? Like, so I know in my mind that a lot of people say Jonathan always has something to say. They're always angry. They're always upset about something. And it's like, well, you should be upset too, girl, because it's gonna come for you later. But the reality of the thing is that a lot of these markers that are being put onto us, I'll just have to say it, the tags that aren't there, that don't exist, is because folks don't see us. But then also too, a lot of the markers and tags that we get are coming from white folks who are upset that we are coming after them, if that makes sense.
And I think it'll always be inadequate when we rely on the creators of those platforms to outline for us who we can be. And so it has to come from us. It has to come from the ground up. So when we're relying on their imaginations, we'll always be limited by the options that they present. And I think that's in form of representation, but also regulation and how we relate to each other and how we build community. It's currently dictated by their norms. And so until we create spaces that are controlled by us, I think we'll always be limited by their imaginations.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. And I'm trying not to get too dystopian on just sort of saying sometimes not being legible to whiteness is a blessing. And in particular for, kids in the gaming space, the levels of harassment that we see when we are legible, when we can tag each other, when we can build community, is frankly terrifying. Like that side of the internet is really, often we cloak ourselves. It's like ancestral knowledge that we brought online, like sort of the ability to cloak ourselves and not necessarily be identifiable because of the harm that comes our way. And so I'm of two minds. One, I want to connect with people. And also sometimes being visible enough to find your people also helps you find people that you don't necessarily want to see you. And I don't know what to do that. I talk with big companies all the time about that piece. They can't figure out what to do about it. They're like, use your real name, like use your real gender. They can do like, do we want that level of identification? Probably not. Because that can be really scary for a lot of us. So there's not a good answer to that, except for us to build our own platforms, right? Like, except for us to own our own platforms. And so, back to sort of ownership and like the need for that. And also protecting our data, really being thoughtful about it, recognizing that our data is assets, thinking about things like data co-ops, whereby we can own our own data and figure out who gets access to it. So I think as we sort of move into the next evolution of the internet, that's sort of where we're going to end up.
Yeah, I think the points that have been made are so important. Like working backwards, I think we have to have our own, right? And this is not just, for social media or anything virtual. I think we've seen this across the board for everything, quite frankly, right? Like we're seeing it in the publishing industry, we're seeing it in publications, so on and so forth. Because the reality of it is when we are legible, as Lauren put so eloquently, oftentimes that legibility is appropriated immediately, right? So, you look at something like TikTok, which I just recently joined TikTok, and it was already the worst decision I've ever made in my life. But, one of the things I try to do is, I try to create safe spaces for people's identities, right? Through my Twitter, through my books, through my TikTok, Instagram. And for doing that, what's actually happened is I have been suppressed, right? Because safe spaces don't make money for these institutions, right? Like, and safe spaces are not pro-capitalism. And so I think that if we don't create our own, what we're doomed to do is have all of our intellectual property as people taken while we continue to be left out in the cold and erased, quite frankly.
Thank you, everybody, for responding to that. There was a lot of things that really struck me from all of your responses that have inspired me to even think about the times in which I have been disenfranchised from the internet or kind of stowed away through censorship because of the things that I like to speak about and the work that I do. I'm also a fat, Black, queer, non-binary person who's also femme presenting. So there are a lot of things to hold and that I have to navigate while navigating the capitalist, white supremacist thing that is the internet, because yes, it's a great tool, but we also have to talk about the things that are oppressive about it too. And like Lauren said, yes, it's empowering to feel like you can identify and self-identify and put yourself out there, but there's always the caveat of that risk, that lack of safety that comes with being a Black person, especially if you are not a Black person that's cisgendered, that has money, that is lighter skinned, that has an able body, that exists in a thin body. All those more desirable, more socially acceptable traits that are closer to whiteness, all those things incredibly impact the ways in which we navigate. So much so that when it comes to things like parasocial relationships, when it comes to things like you're trying to protect yourself on the internet because you're just speaking your truth and people are just being trolls and being bullies and being inappropriate, there's never any repercussions for that type of behavior, but there is always 1,000% a repercussion for just being yourself as a Black person, and it's tiresome. And quite frankly, it's not safe. The internet is really not a safe space for us. So I agree. Yes, we do need to make our own spaces with the intention that we are making it from a space of care, community, compassion, and also intersectionality. Because again, yes, a lot of times we have Black spaces that come up, but a lot of times they're for cisgendered folk. They're very much operating in a binary system that lacks the intersectionality that Black people deserve, because Black people are not monolithic. We are well beyond that. So the next thing, because folks talked about the ways in which people like to appropriate and kind of benefit from Blackness without giving credit to Black folk, without giving us a space to be ourselves and benefiting from those things that they are taking from us. How have things like social media marketing and influencer marketing impacted the ways in which people understand and even co-opt Black identities on the internet?
So I guess I'll go ahead and start because I just had a tweet start to move. So I think it's, I forget I think it's Brett I forget their last name, but overall they are an influencer who was involved in the beauty industry, and they had tweeted something, or there was a video that started to move where they're talking about, I don't want to be a part of the beauty industry anymore. And it was so interesting to me because it was like, wow, well, one, you made a whole bunch of money off of the beauty industry, but also two, you made a lot of money appropriating or trying to sound like a Black queer person. So let's talk about that, sis. If you really want to talk about why you're famous and why folks know who you are, it's because of your appropriation. And so all of that to say, I think about it. I think about the only way I can answer this question is, and I tweeted something like this yesterday. I said, yes, I'm doing okay, but imagine if I had the resources that a whole bunch of white and other brown folks had for appropriating and doing the same thing that I'm doing. That's the thing I'm constantly thinking about in the notion of social media marketing, right? There's this thing that Blackness is, I don't know if we can say it, but I'm gonna say it. Everybody want to be a nigga, but don't nobody want to be a nigga. Like it's frustrating to me because even in media and marketing, right? Everybody wants to be Black. Everyone wants to capitalize on Blackness. Everyone wants to have some sort, you see Old Navy getting people dancing and they're doing all of this, but it's like, really, sis? Like, if we were to do something like that, then everyone would be upset and be very, you know, oh, they're pushing an agenda, they're pushing the woke agenda. So I just say all that to say that I think it's just very interesting that it's profitable when it's not coming from us. So
Yeah, and I taught a class last semester called "Fuck You, Pay Me," and it was about this. And all the data says that everybody who pretends to be Black makes money and we don't. Regardless of our audience size, regardless of how many clicks we get paid in product and they get paid in cash. And so it's a highly unregulated space. And if there's communication organizing to do, it's around, we need to be transparent about what we're getting paid for brand partnerships. So that would be just the one thing I'd add.
Yeah, I mean, everything that's been said so far is, per usual, amazing. But one of the things, you know, I wanted to call out, you know, again, me as a cishet Black man, I'm like 6'3". I'm like, I have as much proximity, I think, that you can have to whiteness, except for if I was like fair skinned and biracial, I suppose. But even in that, it's interesting because what I've tried to push is more people with privilege, right, that I have having conversations. And so I think more people have started having conversations who have this amount of privilege. But what's happening online that's interesting is suppression when you actually start having these conversations, right? So, and not even just online. So like one of my books, Patriarchy Blues, is all about transphobia, homophobia, the role that cishet people play, all these different things. And HarperCollins as an institution didn't market it, right? So like, what do we do in a world where we're trying to have the conversations as Black people and then the institutions just refuse to let us have the conversations? Because I think it's happening across the board. And I know it's not necessarily a response, but I pose the question and kind of to all of us, because I'm wondering what we should do.
Dr. Cogburn, would you like to chime in?
I just think in general, and we keep coming back to this theme of our own, and we just need to stop asking for permission and waiting for them to not be anti-Black, period, right? And so we can't keep clicking our heels, hoping that our explanations and our data and our science is going to be enough, and our analysis, right, is going to be enough to convince them to not be anti-Black. And so if we accept that truth, then what? Because waiting for them and their permission to do anything on our behalf is you know, futile.
Thank you, Dr. Cogburn. And just a note for everybody, if you start seeing my wig tilting, it's because I'm so blown away by y'all's responses. So in a minute, this mullet wig will be off and on this desk because I'm just so floored. The wigs are shifting, honey, and I'm just gonna let it shift. But on the notion of that, Fred, you asked, what can we do to even combat that? A lot of times I just keep my mouth quiet and I pray to myself, because number one, I don't want to be, you know, getting ugly with people when I have to just stay to myself and protect my peace. But then there are times where I have to get ugly and the wig has to come off and the lashes come off and these clip-ons come off. And I have to let you know, listen, like what you're doing is unfair and it's making me feel as if I don't exist and I don't matter, because that's what these brands will do. You only exist in terms of what you can do, what you can put out, the labor that you can produce, the ideologies and the ideations that you can give for people to copy and for people to benefit off of. So when you see all these non-Black folks on TikTok doing these trends, because you know the Black folks did it first, acting like they did it, and then the Black people speak up, it's this gaslighting that all of y'all mentioned in the chat, like, oh, you just shouldn't be saying that. This person has the right to post this, but this person doesn't have the right to steal. And that's the bottom line. You're stealing from people. And the thing is that people care so little about Black folk that theft is okay and profitable is very problematic. So one of the things, like I agree with Lauren, we need to start speaking more about how much we're getting paid, but not really just Black people, because we talk about it all the time, especially amongst ourselves. We'll tell you when somebody like, yo, this person ain't paid me, or yo, this person only gave me product. It's really these non-Black people that need to be like, I got 10K just for smiling on camera. Like, be honest about what you're being paid, because we know we're not getting that 10K. You know we're not getting that. So I think we need to have more. If you want to be so quick to be like you're an ally, or quick to be like you're here to support the Black community. Like everyone loves to throw that around, especially during Black History Month, especially during Juneteenth, especially when we unfortunately meet our demise at the hands of white people in the police state and the government and the world over. Y'all need to put y'all money where y'all mouth is and actually say what you're going to do. Okay, yes, this is how I'm being benefiting from y'all, which is I'm getting paid and y'all are not. So the honesty and the onus of being honest is really on non-Black people at this point. And as Black people, we need to, I've kind of stepped back from, you know, being the person that says you need to speak up, because at the end of the day, people are going to do what they want to do, right? And I feel like we shouldn't tire ourselves out, because rest and play are very important and crucial for Black people. But we can go all day about that. And then someone said theft and the misappropriation is bravery and not slavery. What don't you correct? It's like, okay, like y'all are misappropriating and confining us to these things that don't help us. But to conserve time, we are going to keep going, knowing that all these things are against us, knowing the resources that we do have. Are there any examples of communities or platforms that do allow Black people to experience and authentically represent the full breadth of their identities?
This might be a quick one.
Wow. I'm trying to stay professional here.
There's no complicated response to that, right?
No. Black Planet.
But you know what? If I can, so I think that's a good question. I guess the answer is no. But if I can, Cheyenne, I think that kind of connects to something you said when you were kind of like, and I'm paraphrasing, like the onus shouldn't be on Black people to necessarily do the work, right? And also, right, when we do create these spaces, when we do create things, we also have to hold each other accountable for maintaining and perpetuating the same things as white supremacy, right? So like, I look at the conversation that happened recently, I think between like Van Lathan and Emmanuel Acho, and I actually think that was a really important conversation for those who didn't see it. Emmanuel Acho wrote Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man and did these like digital sit downs with people, and they were actually really problematic, like very anti-Black, right? Like sit downs with the police and, you know, all these different things. And so like Van Lathan held him accountable. And I think what happens often, especially again from cishet Black men a lot of times, is that even when we create these spaces and they're Black, they're not Black, right? They are Black for me and for this person, but not for everyone. So I do think that like the onus shouldn't be on us to move white people, but I do think we need more accountability for how we're not being inclusive enough within the community though, and thoughtful.
Yeah, I would say that, you know, a couple of years ago, I was part of a beautiful community called Afrotectopia, was started by an academic. And maybe some people here remember that, but that to me was a space of like beautiful Blackness on the internet that we sort of tore it apart from the inside. With colorism, perceived colorism, you know, people's inability to sort of exist in a space where we can listen to each other. And I think being a community requires a level of grace and poise that and everybody in the community has to do that. Otherwise, we wear down community moderators with sort of our purity policing. And so I think that we probably have to redefine what community looks like in online spaces, because we're not always proximate to each other. But that was a beautiful space for, you know, close to 2 years before it was sort of just, you know, broken up.
You know, we spent so much time fighting oppressive forces and focusing out there that we have not spent nearly enough time dealing with ourselves and how we've been impacted by these systems of oppressions, the way we've appropriated them and internalized them. There's some very difficult conversations that we need to be having with each other that we rarely have the space and energy to have, because we're explaining the basics of racism to white people. So again, there's more energy that needs to turn inward, because when we finally do get together, Lauren, like all this complicated stuff starts to come up. And I would argue, like when we start to disagree, that's the space we need to be in. If we're still all in agreement, we're fighting outward. If we're dealing with the complexities of who we are and what we want and what community means and what good feels like and what freedom feels like, that's a much more complicated conversation that's in-house. And we need more spaces to unpack that and deal with that and not act like we are a monolith, right? Yes, we are Black and we are complicated and have a range of ideologies and experiences and backgrounds and identities and positionalities that we have to unpack and deal with internally as well.
Yeah, I also think the unpaid moderator in our spaces is a thankless job. And if we don't all as communities come together and start really thinking about restorative justice principles and how we have conversations with each other, we're really screwed. Because people get run down doing that sort of labor.
Thank y'all for that. One thing that reminds me of, because I feel like we have to go beyond the internet itself and even think about one of the pillars that even helps us to get the language that we need to kind of combat these forces and kind of have these conversations is education, is academia. And as a person who teaches in an academic space at a PWI, like Dr. Cogburn said, we do spend a lot of time focusing on how to teach non-Black and white people to be better to Black people and to understand and unpack their own biases and their own anti-Blackness that they've internalized. And I would also even move to say we do need more education around the things that we talk about, not just us doing it, but other people giving space for Black people to continue having these conversations, but safely. Because as we know, especially in PWI places, there aren't a lot of us, and there isn't a lot of safety for us to even decompress and have these in-house conversations amongst ourselves in order to care for ourselves. And this also translates onto the internet, where we don't have enough space to safely have conversations. Because at the end of the day, it's not safe if it's not a platform made by us. And even when it is a platform made by us, there are still questions to how can we maintain that safety? So the one thing I would like to say before I move on to another question is, you know, when we talk about community, we talk about the grace, like Lauren said, we talk about the understanding, but we also have to talk about the accountability too, which we've all had to look at a mirror and be like, what are some ways in which I can look at myself and kind of understand from a different perspective, or to grow as a person and to understand other people's perspectives, even my own at times, because we don't always have the language for that either. And a lot of people kind of shun accountability because it's this question of, I look like a bad person because I did something. It's not about looking like a bad person. It's not about holding that guilt. It's about learning and moving forward. We can't move forward without grace and accountability. And truth be told, accountability is linked with grace, because I'm given the grace enough to even have this conversation with you, to even see you as a community member. So would you like to add on to that, Dr. Higgins?
Yeah, you struck something in me when you were talking, and I've been hearing this too. Like when talking about our own platforms, the only thing that kind of comes to mind for me is that we have to make sure too that as we're navigating what platforms and who's doing what they're. So two things. I'm just gonna say this real quickly. I'm always intentional about folks and who I follow. Do folks want privilege or do folks want liberation is a big thing for me. And I find that even in Black spaces, you get a lot of people who are vying for privilege instead of the liberation. So that's the reason why there's some folks I just don't follow, because I can see that they want the privilege. But the other thing that I will say too, that I think is very important for us to follow is that sometimes even like, I know Twitter is a shit show right now, but I have crafted my Twitter in a way that I only see stuff from Black people that I only truly, fuck with. Like, I'm not following you back if I know that you're going to make my spirit in my head uncomfortable, because there is no real place for me, right? Outside of, and I could go to TikTok, I could go to Twitter, I could go to Instagram, whatever. But even on all of those platforms, even on Facebook, my mama, my brother, and my cousins are the only 3 people I follow on Facebook, right? I'm very intentional about crafting spaces for me. So when I click in and I log in, I'm not doing more damage to myself on these sites amongst all the other stuff that's also happening around me.
And that actually brings me to another question I've been thinking about. How do y'all personally care for yourselves when you recognize that you can't fully see yourselves in spaces, when you recognize that spaces are unsafe and unkind and unfair? What do we do individually for y'all, and even collectively? What can we do to take care of ourselves in these moments?
One thing that's been coming up for me, I've been reading this book called Black Aliveness and the Poetics of Being, which really for me has been so poignant in talking about we don't live full lives when we're only fighting oppression. We have to have imagination. We have to be thinking about the future. We have to spend time designing the spaces we want to live and exist in. And if that's not part of our daily lives, we will slowly wither away. And so for me, creating more space, again, not explaining racism 101, not only fighting oppression, but just think about Black people and our well-being and our futures that have nothing to do with nobody else. And so I need that space to be, that doesn't mean I'm not continuing this fight, but it also means that can't be the balance can't be off, that I have to have a balance where I'm focusing on these other things. And that's become so salient for me, especially in the past couple of years. And I feel more and more of us taking that space and moving in that direction, because otherwise we won't survive. We can't, that's an incomplete humanity to only exist in response to pain and trauma.
Thank you, Dr. Cogburn. Fred?
I think for me, so someone just said, you know, building safe spaces, you know, difficult or interesting rather, because you don't want to build an echo chamber. And I think I struggle with trying to find a balance for that, right? Because on the one hand, I know I need to be fighting to fight climate change and, you know, racism and all the things that are happening actively. But I think that I started creating bubbles of joy in the fall. So, you know, my first book was teaching young white people how to not be garbage. And my second book was teaching primarily cishet people how to not be garbage. And I'm just constantly, you know, teaching people how to not be garbage. But what happened was my wife became pregnant and we miscarried after, you know, nearly second term. And when I was online, people were like joking about it, right? Like trolling me over that experience, right? And they weren't just white people, it was white and black people, so on and so forth. And in that moment, I became so enraged, I actually made myself sick and had to go to the hospital. And I said to myself, you know, we can't do this work without finding ways to be alive, right? Not like to continue living, but be actually alive, right? Like, and I think that that's a key difference that I've started telling everybody. Like, you know, if you're a writer, write the picture book for kids and also write the book that's, you know, teaching something, right? Like, write the comic book while also teaching if you want to do that, or don't do that. And, you know, I don't know. I hope that everybody on here, all of us on this panel, and everyone who's watching, you know, they do at times create the echo chambers. It doesn't mean you have to stay in the echo chamber, but create the echo chambers where the joy is bouncing off the walls and bouncing back at you to keep you alive.
You know, for me, so I like to say, you know, y'all know that I'm very big on, like, I'm trying to break into the industry pre-WGA here. And one of the things that for me has been so healing in the process of trying to break into the industry is reframing the way that I do my work, right? So I can write stories, and I'm constantly told about my stories. Oh, your stories about Blackness and queerness and all that is a little niche. But, you know, as I've been working with my mentors and friends, you know, how do I find joy and trying to write stories that a lot of folks maybe not be connecting in? And so the thing I've been doing is I'm writing stories about Black people whooping white people's ass. I'm writing a horror right now where, you know, a curse is put on a whole entire town of white people, and these Black spirits are coming back to get even, right? That's been fun for me, right? I'm writing a story where I have a whole entire curse that is literally coming back to whoop, you know, white ancestors and white people's ass. That for me makes me feel joy. So when I open up, you know, all of the stuff that I'm doing, I'm writing my outlines, and I'm opening up, you know, different things. I'm dreaming up a world where I don't see the pain of Black people. Yes, the painful thing happened, but there's also joy on the other side of it. And that's really, for me in the last few years, that is what's been holding me, is really thinking about it as, yes, this really jacked up, fucked up thing has continued to happen to us, but I'm still gonna get mine at the end, child. Like Janelle Monáe says that at the end of her, you know, her last album, right? All of these terrible things may happen, but I'm still gonna be here at the end. And that's the thing that I definitely want folks to hear and to know, is that even when all these messed up things happen and folks come after us, like even right now, I just found out this morning that I'm on the professor's watch list. Good, watch me. Continue to keep looking, girl, because I'm not going to shut up. And if you come for me, like Auntie Maxine said, make sure you don't miss. Please show up at my door. Come to my door. Come on over. Please show up. Because if you do, make sure you are prepared. I think for me, I went from being concerned and scared, and now I'm living in a place of I don't care anymore. And I don't say I don't care as a flippant, like I don't care. It's a thing of, y'all are not going to silence me, because even if I don't say nothing, you still gonna come after me. MLK did it the right way and y'all killed him. So what? So what else? What is the other option at this point? So I'm sorry, I'm testifying, but I'm just in a moment right now, because I'm I'm hearing this question and I'm hearing this and I'm seeing all of my friends who are doing the work tire out. And I'm seeing so many of them get, so sad. And I'm going, that ain't gonna be me. I'm sorry to the folks who are having a moment right now and need to yeah, I get it. Take care of yourself, boo. But y'all not gonna come, y'all not gonna get me, y'all not gonna tire me out. That's not gonna happen. Sorry.
Thank you, everybody. And Fred, I'm so sorry for your loss. And thank you for the vulnerability that you displayed in sharing that.
Yes.
Real briefly before our last question, I may have to get on my testifying real quick. I just want everyone to know that when we think about a Black future, we have to think about ourselves as people first. Like at the end of the day, I'm a nigga first, a writer later, an educator later. I'm a nigga, period. And I want to hold that. And I want to hold space for that. And I also want to hold space for the fact that we do need to rest. We do need to experience joy. We do need to see ourselves as people and as human, which is always ripped away from us. So I'm thankful for y'all sharing that. And also Dr. Higgins, I can also identify that I've been shifting my work too, to like, if I can't see myself, I have to put myself out there. So I've been writing a story about a fat Black non-binary witch and just them existing as such without having issues. And I think that's very important to have these conversations and this content. Last question. In the wake of things like cultural appropriation, Blackfishing, and the fetishization of our race, community, and culture, how do we safeguard Blackness while on the internet?
So I'll jump in. I think we need to create technologies that help watermark our work, right? So how do we track that the dance started with person X and that this is the thread that it followed? And I think that kind of visibility, aside from like going back and documenting it, but actually how could we technically track it? I think is one piece of it. But we also have a broader conversation. I think there's a question in the Q&A about what is Blackness and who gets to call themselves Black. That's, I think, a bigger conversation. If we're going to safeguard it, we might want to talk about that.
Thank you for that, Dr. Cogburn. Would anyone else like to respond?
Yeah, I would just say that those oh, go on, Fred. Go for it. You want me to go?
No, please. You're smarter than I am. Please go right ahead.
We've known each other too long for that. What was I going to say? See, you threw me off. Oh, those technologies are here. We have to use them. Decentralized technologies to me for Black folks are like the thing. Having worked for so long with artists who are constantly worried about, concerned about their intellectual property and everything else. If we don't start using blockchain platforms, I don't know what else to do. At this point, we know what Twitter is, and I think we all need to get off of it. And my self-care is I actually don't engage people I don't know, period. Like if you don't know, mood bombing happened, they dropped the bomb on Philadelphia. I have like a list of questions that I ask people before I engage with them, especially white people. But decentralized technologies allow us to sell what we want to sell, hold on to what we don't want to hold on, hold on to what we want to hold on to, and to be able to track the provenance of things across the internet for generations. So to me, we always master technologies first, despite what people want to tell you about the digital divide. Like we always have, and the data says that we always get there first. We always understand the thing first, and this is just the next thing that we have to understand to be able to use.
And we always make it better.
Always.
So, like I said, smarter than I am. I didn't even think of the watermarks or the decentralization. So I was gonna actually say, since we being on some nigga shit, what we need to actually have is like one of the things that white supremacists and racists are really good at is like ganging up on people, right? I don't play that shit online, right? Like if Dr. Higgins is online and somebody's being, a bigot in some way, I have a platform. I will just jump in. If you message me and be like, yo, I'm getting bombed on, I'll just jump in and be like, yo, it's whatever you want to do. And I think we need more of that, to be quite frankly. Like, we need to be in like nigga community, have each other's back online. Like all the other aspects are absolutely necessary, right? The technological aspects, but we need to bring it, right? Like I'm not playing. How many people, like if I'm gonna say I'm an ally, if I see a Black woman being bullied online, if I see a Black trans person being bullied online, I'm gonna bring smoke. And then if you want smoke in person, I'm gonna bring smoke in person. And we need more of that. It's not enough. We trying to be all respectable online and whatnot, and we dealing with non-respectable people.
But you're talking about analog and digital strategies, right? And I think that's the other thing that I have, which is I would love for mixtapes to come back. Like some things actually aren't for everybody, and we put all of our business online. And I'm like, can we do like mixed books? Like, Fred, can I like next time I'm like, can you hand me a copy? Like, can we just, I actually think there's a lot of beauty in like the actual things the media you can feel. And so while that can be like, I don't know, I just think ease seduces and the internet is easy and we just keep getting screwed.
You are like, I'm sorry, like you are sorry, Cheyenne, my apologies.
No, it's okay. I just want to, I don't
Sorry,
mean to
go ahead.
cut y'all off. I just want to briefly thank everybody for coming.